Claire, let me start with you. As someone who has been a candidate for federal office and is a former prosecutor and who knows these things, is it possible that we're looking at potential criminal liability here around the fundraising stuff?
Well, it's not a simple answer. There's two buckets of potential criminal activity. One is campaign finance. But I got to tell you, Rachel, it's complicated. I spent some time on the phone today with Mark Elias, and I was checking my work with him, and he agreed. A lot of it depends on what was the committee that raised it, where did the money go to what committees, and how was the money spent. And, you know, the fact that our campaign finance laws are so bugged up that it's not obviously criminal is subject for another show. But the other bucket that he really may have trouble with, the Trump organization might, and Donald Trump himself, is consumer protection laws. This is in the same bucket that they got Bannon for, where he was saying he was building a wall and they were lining their pockets. Those typically are handled by states' attorneys general, and not by the federal government, although the federal government could stick their foot in if they could find some wire fraud and it was big and blatant enough, and this may turn out to be that.
So in that instance, the way you're talking about that second sort of bucket, any state attorney general in a state where a Trump donor made a donation on the basis of false claims, thinking they were donating, for example, to a fund that didn't actually exist and the money went to Kimberly Guilfoyle instead, a state attorney general in a state where a donor was aggrieved for having made that donation, that kind of case could be filed anywhere in the country.
I can see a bunch of Democratic attorney generals around the country getting busy right now. I mean, this is a garden variety consumer fraud. The consumer was told they were giving their money for one thing, and it went 60 grand of it went for 2.5 minutes of Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Ari Melber, how do you see this?
I think that this is one of the more complicated and more diluted areas of law out of everything we've learned. So they should definitely look into it because people may feel they were defrauded and the misuse of those funds is important. So it may be, as mentioned, any level of law enforcement, state or federal, looks at this. But the reason I think they brought this up so vociferously today as part of the criminal intent hearing is to make sure people understand we saw the evidence that he knew he lost. And we saw the evidence that he illicitly and criminally, they would say, intended to continue to fight to stay in office. And even if someone might not buy that, right, imagine a jury of 12. He had another illicit intent, which was to rip people off. So it's kind of doubling down. You only need one illicit intent, right? Bad act, bad mental state. But lawyers love to have more than one argument. That's why we're so annoying. You know, this and then that. But here, a strong prosecutorial case, and this is a committee full of prosecutors, is saying these are two potentially illicit mental states.
And he never spends it on any legal defense. It also shows that he knew
Exactly.
there wasn't any.
That he didn't think there was anything to spend it on legitimately.
Can I ask you, though, because there's a Letitia James bucket, too, right? I mean, Letitia James did something different than what Cy Vance was initially doing. This was it was a civil investigation. I guess it is still ongoing civil investigation. Is there a possibility that the Trump organization somehow might wind up paying some civil penalty, even if there's not like a crime that someone can find, like a Bannonite crime?
Well, that's kind of what Claire was discussing in terms of consumer protection, right?
Okay, so that would be
so
civil.
like with the civil case was also brought for Trump University, right?
Right, exactly.
And that was brought as a civil case because it was individual people who were defrauded who thought they were paying for something and got another. Similarly, I mean, presumably, Claire, that's the sort of thing that could be pursued on the basis of wronged donors. Although the donors would presumably have to be upset about this forward of their funds rather than being happy with how they were spent.
Yeah, you just need a few to be upset. You wouldn't need all of them to be upset. If, in fact, a donor said, I was defrauded, and they could make the elements of a fraud that they were told it was one thing and used for another, there is certainly basis under state consumer protection laws, which typically is where these cases would be brought.